A Chicago magnate believes that money can solve any problem until a woman in rags bursts into the hospital where his son is admitted. When she whispers 5 devastating words and opens an old locket, revealing secrets he thought he had buried forever, the most powerful man in the city discovers that some debts cannot be paid with money. In a moment of absolute shock, his entire life collapses, forcing him to face the most impossible choice of his existence. Between the son he raised and the son he abandoned, between the world he built and the redemption that could destroy him. But when time runs out and a life hangs by a thread, but in moments of forgiveness that may come too late, he realizes that true wealth is not measured in dollars.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The heels of Richard Stone's Italian shoes echoed authoritatively through the white marble corridors of the Presbyterian Memorial Hospital, each step resounding like a hammer striking the verdict of his importance. The $3,000 suit, tailored in London, perfectly hugged his imposing silhouette of 1 meter and 85 centimeters, while his steel-gray eyes scanned the environment with the same disdain he reserved for companies he intended to buy and tear apart. I don't care if the meeting with the Japanese was scheduled 3 weeks ago. Peterson. His sharp voice echoed through the platinum cell phone held to his ear.
Tell them Richard Stone doesn't change his schedule for anyone.
If they want to do business with me, they'll wait. A middle-aged nurse, impeccably dressed in white and with a gentle expression on her face, approached him with a professional smile. Mr. Stone? Can't you see I'm speaking? He cut her off abruptly, covering the phone's microphone with his hand. His eyes pierced her with the coldness of a scalpel. Wait your turn. The woman stepped back slightly, her smile wavering like a candle in the wind. Richard returned his attention to the phone, as if she were just another insignificant obstacle in his path. As I was saying, Peterson, I want the Midwest Industries merger contracts on my desk by 5 o'clock this afternoon. And I don't accept excuses. My time is worth more than the GDP of some countries. The hospital's air conditioning whispered softly, mixing with the distant murmur of voices and the occasional beep of medical equipment. But Richard seemed oblivious to all that, lost in his own universe of numbers, acquisitions, and power. His mind automatically calculated 3 acquisitions closed this week, 5 smaller companies being evaluated for hostile takeover, the value of Stone Industries shares rising 16% in the last quarter. Mr. Stone. The nurse tried again, this time with a firmer tone. I need to speak with you about your son. The word son cut through his phone conversation like lightning. Michael. His 12-year-old boy, his hair as blonde as his mother, Victoria's, and green eyes shining with an innocence Richard could barely recall having once had. Peterson. I'll call you back later, he murmured into the phone, ending the call with a sharp thumb motion. His eyes turned to the nurse, but the human warmth that should have been there with concern for his son was absent. It was pure impatience, as if Michael were just another item on his overloaded schedule. What happened? Where is he? Your son is stable, sir. The accident was... I know what happened. He cut her off again, adjusting the golden cuffs of his shirt. Victoria already told me everything over the phone. Some idiot driver hit their limousine on Michigan Avenue. I want to know when I can take my son home. The nurse took a deep breath, her hands clasped in front of her body as if preparing for a silent battle. Mr. Stone, your son suffered serious injuries. He will need to stay hospitalized for a few days for observation. Dr. Hamilton can explain better. How much? The question left his lips as naturally as if asking the time. How much does it cost to speed up this process? To get the best doctors, the best equipment? Money is no problem. Something shifted in the nurse's face. A shadow of disapproval crossed her brown eyes, as subtle as a cloud passing before the sun. It's not a matter of money, Mr. Stone. It's a medical issue. Your son needs time to recover. Richard felt a flash of irritation rise in his chest like hot lava. Time. The only thing money could not buy directly, though he always found ways to cut corners, to accelerate processes, to make the world spin at the pace he demanded. He looked around the main hall of the hospital, the walls of Italian imported marble, crystal chandeliers costing more than luxury cars, original paintings by renowned artists, decorating every corner. This was the Presbyterian Memorial, the hospital where only Chicago's most powerful families got access, where senators came for treatment, where multinational CEOs did their checkups, where the medical elite charged fortunes for surgeries that were true works of art. And yet, even here, in the temple of high-standard medicine, there were people who dared to say no to Richard Stone. "Where is the VIP ward?" he asked, his voice laden with authority. "I want to see my son now." The nurse hesitated for a moment, consulting a clipboard in her hands. "You need to sign some documents first, and then I can." "I don't need anything," he retorted, already moving in the direction his powerful man's instinct guided him. "I know where it is." His steps took him through increasingly luxurious corridors, where the marble gave way to polished granite, where fresh flowers were changed twice a day, where every detail shouted exclusivity and privilege. He passed through a series of tempered glass doors, each requiring a special access card, each opening automatically upon recognizing his face in the country's most advanced biometric security system. The VIP ward of the Presbyterian Memorial was a world apart, a sanctuary where only Chicago's most powerful names were allowed entry. It was here that politicians recovered from secret surgeries, where business magnates underwent treatments not even the press knew about, where the city's wealthiest families cared for their loved ones away from the world's eyes. And this was where Richard Stone walked now, with the same relentless confidence that had made him one of the most feared and respected men in the American business world. The contrast was brutal. While Richard Stone disappeared down the marble corridors toward the sanctuary of the privileged, a completely different figure materialized in the main hall of the Presbyterian Memorial like an apparition from another world. Emma Davis dragged herself through the automatic glass doors, her bare feet leaving small, damp marks on the gleaming floor. The winter coat that covered her had seen better days torn at the right shoulder, stained from countless nights spent sleeping in dark alleys, with the lining coming out of an opening at the left cuff. Her grayish-brown hair hung in disheveled strands around her face, framing features that were once delicate but now bore the weight of 42 years of a life that had crumbled piece by piece. But it was her eyes that told the true story. Blue like a winter sky, they burned with a determination that seemed fueled by something far more powerful than mere survival. There was an urgency there, a need that transcended hunger, cold, or exhaustion that clearly consumed her fragile body. The head receptionist, a 50-year-old woman with perfectly styled hair in an elegant bun, looked up from the computer screen and immediately frowned. Her nose twitched slightly, an automatic reaction to the street smell Emma carried with her a mix of old rain, cigarette smoke, and abandonment. "Sorry, but I think you are mistaken," the receptionist said, her voice sounding like the tinkling of breaking crystal. "This is a private hospital. The free clinic is downtown, on Clark Street." Emma took a deep breath, the air entering her lungs with a subtle wheeze she tried to hide. Her fingers, dirty but still elegant, grasped the edge of the reception desk as if it were a lifeline. "I'm not here for myself," she said, her voice hoarse but determined. "I'm looking for a child. A 12-year-old boy who was admitted today after a car accident on Michigan Avenue." The receptionist exchanged a meaningful glance with the colleague beside her, a look Emma knew well. It was the same look she received at supermarkets, banks, everywhere people like her were unwelcome. "Ladies, I can't just give patient information to anyone who shows up here," the receptionist replied, her fingers drumming impatiently on the keyboard. "Besides, access to patient information is restricted to immediate family members." Emma felt a familiar sting in her chest, followed by a burning sensation rising up her throat. Discreetly, she brought her hand to her lips, coughing as quietly as possible. When she moved her hand away, there were small red drops on her palm, which she quickly wiped on the side of her coat. "You don't understand," she insisted, her voice gaining a more urgent tone. "I have important information about that boy." "Information that could—" "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," interrupted the receptionist, already reaching for the phone. "This is a private establishment, and we have very specific protocols about—" "My name is Emma Davis," she said quickly, the words pouring out in a torrent. "And I know things about Michael Stone that you need to know, things that could affect his treatment." The mention of the name Stone made the receptionist hesitate for a moment. In Chicago's high society, few names carried as much weight as that one. But then she looked again at Emma, her tattered clothes, her bare feet, the street smell emanating from her, and her expression darkened even more. "Security?" she said into the phone, her voice taking on an official tone. "We have a situation at the main reception." An unauthorized person is trying to obtain information about one of our VIP patients. Emma felt panic rise in her chest like a dark wave. She had come so far, overcome so many obstacles to get here. She couldn't allow them to take her away now, not when she was so close.
Please,
She pleaded, her hands gripping the counter more tightly.
I just need 5 minutes.
5 minutes to speak with someone who can understand. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. A deep voice sounded behind her. Emma turned to see 2 security guards approaching, both dressed in impeccable navy blue uniforms, walkie-talkies clipped to their belts, expressions not allowing for argument. The taller one, a black man about 40 with broad shoulders like a door, extended a hand toward her. "Let's handle this civilly," he said, his voice professional but not entirely unfriendly. "You're going to have to come with us." Emma looked around desperately. The hospital hall stretched in all directions, with corridors leading to different worlds. She could see, in the distance, the glass doors leading to the most exclusive wings, places where only people like Richard Stone had access. "I can't leave," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what's at stake here." The second guard, a younger man with military-cut blonde hair, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't want to cause a scene, but if you don't cooperate, we'll have to use other methods." Emma looked into his eyes and saw something she knew well, the cold determination of someone just doing their job. To them, she was just another problem to be solved, another nuisance to be removed. But then, she thought of the boy. The face she had seen only for a second but which was etched in her memory like a burned photograph. She thought of everything she had lost, all the chances she had missed, all the moments she had been too weak to fight. Not this time. With a sudden move that surprised even herself, Emma stepped away from the guards and ran. Her bare feet slid on the polished floor, but she managed to keep her balance, running toward the corridors leading to the heart of the hospital. "Hey!" shouted the taller guard, his voice echoing through the hall. "Stop her!" But Emma had already disappeared down a side corridor, her tattered figure moving with an agility that contrasted with her frail appearance. She could hear them behind her, their heavy boots pounding the floor, their walkie-talkies crackling with emergency codes. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but her instinct guided her, like an inner compass. She went up a staircase, passed through doors that opened automatically, crossed increasingly luxurious corridors, until she finally saw ahead the tempered glass doors marking the entrance to the VIP wing. And then she saw a familiar figure walking toward those same doors, a tall man in a dark suit, with a posture that screamed power and authority. Richard Stone, the man she had come to find. Room 2012 in the VIP wing was a sanctuary of tranquility and luxury, with walls painted in soft shades of blue and beige, a panoramic window offering a view of Millennium Park, and state-of-the-art medical equipment discreetly integrated into the environment. Michael Stone rested on the adjustable hospital bed, which looked more like a piece of 5-star hotel furniture than medical equipment. His pale face contrasted with his messy blonde hair, and a few scratches on his left arm were the only visible signs of the accident. Richard was leaning over a side table, flipping through insurance papers and speaking quietly on the phone when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. He lifted his eyes, irritated by the interruption, expecting to see a nurse or perhaps Victoria arriving with coffee. Instead, the door flew open wide, and Emma Davis burst into the room like an uncontrollable storm. She was panting, her hair stuck to her sweaty face, her torn coat hanging from her trembling shoulders. Her blue eyes quickly scanned the room until they found the bed where Michael rested, and then something changed in her expression, a mixture of relief and pain so intense it seemed to tear the air around her. Richard froze for a second, his brain processing the impossibility of the scene. How had that person managed to get here? The VIP wing had military-grade security, biometric access systems, protocols that cost millions to implement. "Michael," Emma murmured, taking a step toward the bed, her voice laden with an emotion Richard couldn't identify. That's when fury exploded in his chest like a volcano. "What the hell are you doing in my son's room?" he roared, dropping the phone and lunging toward her with the speed of a predator. His hands closed around Emma's arm with enough force to leave marks, and he dragged her away from the bed. "How dare you come in here?" Emma tried to free herself, but Richard was much stronger. She could feel his fingers digging into her skin through the thin coat, see the vein bulging on his forehead, smell his expensive aftershave mingled with the scent of pure rage. "Let me go!" she shouted, struggling against the grip. "I need to talk to you about—"
About what?
Richard dragged her into the hallway, his voice rising with each word. "About how you dared to violate my family's privacy? About how a worthless tramp like you got past security?" The VIP wing corridor, normally an oasis of silence and discretion, suddenly filled with voices and movement. Doors opened, curious faces appeared in the openings. Nurses abruptly stopped their tasks. An elderly man with white hair, wearing a navy blue silk robe, came out of his room and watched the scene with the morbid fascination of someone witnessing a car accident. "You human trash!" Richard continued shouting, pulling Emma down the corridor as she stumbled to keep up with his long strides. "You think you can come in here into my world and contaminate the air my son breathes?" Emma tried to speak again, her free hand moving instinctively toward the coat pocket where something small and valuable was hidden. "Richard, if you would just listen to me for 1 second. I don't listen to trash," he bellowed, so loud his voice echoed off the marble walls like thunder.
People like you are the scum of society. Parasites who feed off the charity of others.
A young nurse with red hair tied in a tight bun approached hesitantly. "Mr. Stone, perhaps I can." "Don't get involved," he snapped at her without even looking in her direction. "This woman broke into my son's room. She is a threat." Emma managed to turn partially, her desperate eyes meeting those of some of the people crowding the corridor. There was a middle-aged woman in a pink robe watching her with a mixture of curiosity and horror. A man in a suit, probably a lawyer or executive visiting a client, shaking his head in disapproval. Two nurses whispering to each other, clearly shocked by the scene. But no one moved. No one interfered. The Stone name carried too much weight, too much power, too much influence for anyone to dare question him. "Please," Emma begged, her voice breaking as Richard continued to drag her. "Just let me explain." "Explain what?" He spat the words like poison. "How you plan to blackmail my family? How you intend to exploit my son's situation?" The security guards appeared at the end of the corridor, running with the urgency of soldiers responding to a red alert. The same black man who had tried to stop her at reception was at the front, followed by the blonde colleague and 2 more reinforcements. "Mr. Stone," the head guard called out of breath. "We deeply regret." She managed to escape up the stairs to the 2nd floor. "You are incompetent!" Richard yelled, finally stopping, dragging Emma and turning to the guards. "How does a beggar manage to bypass security systems that cost twice your annual salary?" Emma took advantage of the moment when Richard's grip loosened and tried once more to reach the pocket. Her fingers brushed the hidden object small, metallic, loaded with memories and truths Richard needed to know. "Richard," she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear. "I have something that belongs to you." But he didn't even hear her. He was already turning to the guards, pointing to Emma as if she were a bomb about to explode. "Get this thing out of my sight," he ordered. "And this time, make sure she never comes back. Never." The head guard hesitated for a moment, looking at Emma with something that could be interpreted as pity. "Mr. Stone, perhaps it would be better to call the police and—" "I don't want the police," Richard roared. "I want her out of here. Now!" The guards approached Emma, their hands reaching to grab her arms. She looked one last time at Richard, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears and a determination that not even public humiliation could break. "You'll regret not listening to me," she said, her voice clear and firm despite everything. "One day, you will understand what you lost today." And as the guards led her down the corridor, Emma tightened her grip on the object in her pocket, knowing she carried a secret that could change everything if only she had had the chance to reveal it. The corridor of the VIP wing had turned into a theater of tension, where every breath seemed to echo against the marble walls. The security guards had surrounded Emma, their hands ready to carry her out of the hospital for good when she did something no one expected. With a strength that seemed to spring from the deepest despair of her soul, Emma twisted and managed to break free from the grip of the nearest guard. Her bare feet found footing on the polished floor, and she turned to Richard with an urgency that cut through the air like a blade. "Our son needs you," she whispered, but the words came out with the force of a scream. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stood still, as if struck by lightning. His steel-gray eyes, which had burned with fury seconds before, now blinked rapidly, processing the words he had just heard. His aristocratic features contorted with confusion mixed with irritation. "What did you say?" His voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. Emma did not answer immediately. Instead, her trembling hand plunged into the torn pocket of her tattered coat, searching with desperate urgency. Her fingers found the object she had kept so carefully all these years, the only treasure she had managed to hold through all of life's storms. With almost ritualistic movements, she pulled out the golden locket. The chain briefly tangled around her fingers before freeing itself, and the small jewel swung in the air between them like a pendulum of fate. It was an antique locket, the kind bought in expensive jewelry stores on Michigan Avenue, with delicately engraved details around the edge and spots where the gold had lost some of its shine over time. "Do you remember this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Richard looked at the locket, his face a mask of incomprehension. But there was something there, deep in his eyes, beginning to stir like a sleeping animal slowly awakened. Emma opened the locket with a soft click that echoed in the silence, like a gunshot. The small hinge, well cared for despite all the years, revealed its most precious secret. On the left side, a small but perfectly preserved photograph showed a young man. He was 45 now, but in the photo looked only 30. His hair was darker, without the silver strands that now dotted his temples. His face was fuller, less marked by the harsh lines that power and wealth had carved over the years. And, more impressively, there was something in his eyes that no longer existed, a softness, a capacity for love that seemed to have been completely erased by time. It was Richard Stone, unequivocally, undeniably Richard Stone. On the right side of the locket, there was a woman of radiant beauty, with brown hair shining like silk in the sunlight, blue eyes sparkling with pure happiness, and a smile that could light up an entire city. She wore a light blue dress that delicately hugged her silhouette, and her belly was visibly rounded with the early signs of pregnancy. The same woman who now stood before him, unrecognizable beneath layers of time, poverty, and suffering. Richard leaned forward involuntarily, his eyes widening as he studied the photograph. In the image, he was embraced with the pregnant woman, his arm around her waist, looking at her with an expression of complete adoration. It was a photo of pure love, absolute happiness, a moment in time when the world seemed perfect and full of infinite possibilities. But it was when he saw the inscription inside the locket's lid that the world began to collapse around him. Engraved in gold in delicate cursive was written, "Forever, Richard and Emma December, 2008. The words danced before his eyes like snakes. Richard felt the air sucked from his lungs, as if someone had opened a window on a plane in mid-flight. His hands began to tremble. At first, just a subtle shake in his fingers, then spreading to his wrists, his arms, until his whole body seemed to vibrate with a frequency of pure terror. "No," he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a moan. "No, no, no." But the memories began to flood back like a torrent. Emma Davis, beautiful Emma, radiant Emma, who worked as a curator at an art gallery in River North. Emma, whom he had met at a charity party at the Art Institute of Chicago. Emma, who had made him laugh for the first time in years, who had seen through the armor of his success and touched the man beneath. Emma, who had disappeared from his life without explanation 15 years ago. Emma, who was pregnant when she disappeared. Emma? The name slipped from his lips like a broken prayer. His eyes moved from the photograph to the face of the woman before him, desperately searching for familiar features beneath the marks of harsh life. And slowly, like a puzzle being pieced together bit by bit, he began to see her, the delicate line of the nose, the curve of the lips, and especially the eyes, those blue eyes that had haunted his dreams for years before he could finally bury them. "My God," he groaned, his legs beginning to fail. The locket slipped from his trembling hands, falling to the marble floor with a metallic clink that echoed down the corridor like a death sentence. The sound made some of the onlookers shift uneasily, but no one dared approach. Richard staggered backward, his hand seeking support on the wall. His face, always a mask of control and power, was completely shattered. His eyes, which moments before burned with fury, were now glazed with shock and horror. And deep in his mind, a question began to form, a question he did not have the courage to ask, but already knew the terrible answer. If Emma had disappeared pregnant 15 years ago and now had returned talking about our son, then Michael, the boy he had raised as his own son, the boy who was hospitalized just a few meters away, who really was Michael Stone's father. The cold marble floor of the VIP wing corridor met Richard Stone with the cruelty of a reality he could no longer deny. His knees buckled as if made of wet paper, and he collapsed, his hands desperately clutching his chest as the air seemed to be sucked from his lungs by an invisible vacuum pump. I can't breathe," he gasped, his voice coming out in short, broken spasms. The $3,000 suit crumpled against the floor, the Italian silk tie twisting around his neck like a noose. Panic surged over him like a black wave, making his heart race until he could feel each beat echoing in his ears like war drums. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his fingers curling and uncurling as if trying to grasp something that always slipped beyond his reach, and then the memories came. December 2008, Boston. Emma's small living room apartment in Back Bay was decorated for Christmasa, simple but elegant tree in the corner, golden lights casting a warm glow on the soft blue-painted walls. Emma sat on the dark green velvet sofa, a contemporary art book open on her lap, her brown hair shining in the fireplace light. She was an art history professor at Boston University, and her passion for the subject lit up every conversation they had. Richard watched her from the doorway, still wearing the gray overcoat he had on for the business meeting that afternoon. He had come straight from the office to see her, as he had every night for 6 months. Emma was different from the other women he had met, intelligent, without being calculating, beautiful without vanity, passionate about priceless things. "You know I love you, don't you?" he had said that night, stepping closer to her on the sofa. Emma had lifted her eyes from the book, smiling with that expression that made his chest tighten in a way he had never felt before. "I know, and I love you too." Now, on the cold hospital floor, Richard moaned as the memory turned into stabbing pain. "Mr. Stone!" A nurse's voice seemed to come from far away. "Someone call Dr. Martinez. He's having a panic attack." But Richard could barely hear the voices around him. The memories kept coming, each more painful than the last. February 2009, his office in Boston. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a private messenger. The paper was cream, thick, with the golden letterhead of the Hartwell family. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. "Mr. Stone, I would like to invite you to dinner at our residence on Commonwealth Avenue. I have a business proposal that may interest you. Victoria Hartwell." He had heard of the Hartwells, of course. One of New England's wealthiest families, with fortunes built on oil, real estate, and investments dating back to the 18th century. Victoria was the sole heir, a 28-year-old woman with classic beauty and a Harvard business degree. That night, when he told Emma about the invitation, she had laughed. "Looks like you're moving in increasingly exclusive circles," she had said, kissing his forehead. "Just don't forget about us, ordinary people." How wrong she was. How wrong they both were about what was to come. "Richard!" Emma screamed from the other side of the corridor, struggling against the security guards trying to hold her back. "Let me talk to him. He needs to know." But Richard was lost in a labyrinth of memories, each more toxic than the last. March 2009. Victoria Hartwell's first proposal hadn't been about business, as he had expected. It had been an invitation to merge fortunes, a union of empires that would make them one of the most powerful families in the United States, and Victoria was pragmatic. Beautiful in a classical way, intelligently calculating, and completely suited to the world where Richard wanted to establish himself. Emma had felt the change in him even before he admitted it to himself. It began with canceled dinners, increasingly infrequent calls, conversations that seemed distracted. And then came the night when she told him, "Richard, I have something to tell you." Emma was sitting on their bed, the bed he had bought for the apartment they shared on weekends. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a small white stick. "I'm pregnant." The happiness in her eyes had been like the rising sun, pure, radiant, full of expectation and dreams. She had expected him to pick her up, spin her around the room laughing, for them to plan together a future that suddenly seemed possible. Instead, Richard felt as if the world was collapsing around him. "Ah!" The scream tore from his lungs as if something inside him was being violently ripped out. Two nurses knelt by his side, one holding an oximeter, the other trying to check his pulse. "His heart rate is very high," one murmured. "Dr. Martinez, he needs a sedative." But the memories didn't stop. The letter. The damn letter he had left for Emma. It had taken 3 days to write it. 3 days, sitting in his office, staring at blank sheets of paper, trying to find words that could justify the unjustifiable. "Emma, when we entered this relationship, I believe we both understood it was temporary. My career is leading me in directions that require certain social commitments. You are a wonderful woman, but simply not suitable to the social standards my position now demands. I hope you understand this is not personal. It's just business. I wish you all the best in your future life. Richard." He hadn't even mentioned the pregnancy. He had pretended the conversation never happened, that the baby growing inside her was just another problem to be ignored until it disappeared. She was pregnant, Richard murmured now, his words mixing with broken sobs. "My boy? My son? Doctor?" Martinez, a 50-year-old man with gray hair and steady hands, appeared beside the nurses. "What happened here?" he asked, already preparing a syringe. "A family situation, doctor," one of the nurses replied, nervously glancing at Emma, who was still struggling with the security guards. "Looks like there was some kind of revelation." April 2009, Chicago. The marriage to Victoria had been announced in the society papers as the Union of the Year. Richard had moved to Chicago, taken control of a division of the Hartwell businesses, and started building the empire that would make him the man he is today. And Emma. Emma had simply disappeared from his life, as if she had never existed. He had changed his phone number, blocked her emails, instructed his assistants not to accept calls from her. When she had tried to visit his office, security had orders not to let her in. He had erased Emma Davis from his existence, as if she were an accounting error. "My son," Richard repeated, now being gently lifted by the nurses. "Where is my son, doctor?" Martinez had administered the sedative, but Richard still fought its effects, his words drawn out but desperate. "Let's take him to a private room," the doctor instructed. "He needs to calm down before we can properly assess the situation." As they carried him down the corridor, Richard turned his head back, searching for Emma. She was still there, now quieter, but her blue eyes followed him with an intensity that cut through the sedative like a blade. "Emma," he murmured, trying to reach out to her. "The boy, is he?" But the drugs finally took hold, and his voice faded into incoherent murmurs as they took him away, leaving Emma in the corridor, still clutching the medallion that had fallen to the floor like a golden proof of a past that could never be undone. Private room 1506 was smaller than Michael's room in the VIP wing, but it maintained the same standard of elegant discretion as the Presbyterian Memorial. Neutral-toned walls, a small window overlooking an internal courtyard, and only the soft whisper of the air conditioning breaking the heavy silence hanging between Richard and Emma. Richard sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his knees still shaky, his hands clasped together trying to control the tremors. The sedative had eased the panic but left his mind in a strange fog, where emotions and memories mixed like ink in water. His eyes, still bloodshot and confused, fixed on Emma, who was seated in the room's only chair, finally free from the security guard's doctor. Martinez had dismissed. The golden locket lay open on the table between them, the photograph of a happy past serving as a silent witness to the conversation that was about to come. Emma took a deep breath, and Richard could hear the subtle wheezing in her lungs, a sound he should have noticed before but that his fury had masked. She looked smaller in the chair, more fragile, as if telling this story would drain the strength she had left. "His name is Daniel," she began, her voice hoarse but steady. "Daniel Davis. He will turn 15 in December." Richard felt as if someone had poured ice into his veins. A son. He had a son he didn't even know existed. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. "He was born on the 5th of December, 2009, Emma continued, eyes fixed on her own hands. "Exactly on the day you married Victoria Hartwell. I saw the photos in the social newspapers while I was in the hospital, holding our son for the first time." The cruelty of the timing hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. While he exchanged vows with Victoria in a ceremony that cost $300,000, Emma was alone in a hospital, giving birth to his son. "Emma, I didn't know," he started, but she cut him off with a gentle hand gesture. "Number, you didn't know because you chose not to know. I tried to contact you when he was born, Richard. I tried for months, but you had erased our existence so completely it was as if we had never existed." Her words fell into the silence of the room like stones in a deep well. Richard closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what he had done. Not only had he abandoned Emma, but he had abandoned his own son. "After Daniel was born, everything fell apart," Emma continued, her voice taking on a distant quality as if narrating someone else's life. "The university found out about the situation. Not officially, but you know how those social circles are. Whispers, looks, silent judgments. I was the professor who had gotten involved with the promising young businessmen, got pregnant, and then was abandoned." Richard opened his eyes, seeing Emma as if for the first time. The lines of fatigue around her eyes, her hands trembling slightly, the way she shrank in the chair as if trying to protect herself from invisible blows. "They didn't renew my contract," she said simply. "They said it was due to budget cuts, but we both knew the truth. I had a 3-month-old baby, no job, and no experience in anything other than teaching art history to privileged university students." Emma coughed, and Richard saw her quickly bring her hand to her lips, discreetly checking for blood. The gesture was so subtle he almost missed it, but when she lowered her hand, he noticed a small red stain on her palm. "I got jobs as a waitress, then an office cleaner, then a convenience store cashier on the night shift. Sometimes 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, anything to keep a roof over Daniel's head." Richard felt a pain in his chest that had nothing to do with the panic attack. It was something deeper, more cutting. Guilt. Pure and devastating guilt. "I loved him with every fiber of my being," Emma continued. And for the first time since she had started speaking, a small smile touched her lips. "He was so beautiful, Richard. Dark hair like yours, but curlier. And his eyes were exactly like yours used to be. Before you became this." She gestured vaguely toward him, and Richard understood exactly what she meant. Before he became the cruel and calculating man who had conquered Chicago. "But raising a child alone, with no money, no support." Emma shook her head. "I started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Some nights I just stayed awake, staring at Daniel, terrified that something might happen to him." Richard could picture it. Emma, young and desperate, trying to balance multiple jobs and caring for a baby. Always one step behind on bills. Always one problem away from total disaster. "When Daniel was 7, I fainted at work," Emma said, her voice lowering. "I was working 3 jobs, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, living on coffee and scraps of food. My body just gave out." She paused, coughing again, and this time Richard clearly saw the blood she was trying to hide. "They admitted me for a week. Extreme exhaustion, anemia, respiratory issues that never went away. And Daniel stayed with a neighbor who barely knew me because I had no one else." Her words pierced Richard like needles. He had been building an empire, accumulating power and wealth, while his son grew up in poverty, with a mother literally killing herself to care for him. "Social services showed up when I was in the hospital," Emma continued. Her hands clenched until the knuckles turned white. "They said I wasn't providing a stable environment for Daniel, that he needed proper care, stability, a family that could actually take care of him." Richard felt his heart stop. "They took him?" His voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Temporary custody," Emma answered, and tears finally started falling down her face. "They said I could get him back when I proved I was stable, that I could provide a suitable home, that I could properly care for him. But you never managed," Richard said, and it wasn't a question. He could see the answer in Emma's shattered face. "I tried, Richard. God knows I tried. But how do you prove stability when you're living paycheck to paycheck? How do you get a proper home when you're paying for a 1-room apartment barely big enough for a bed? How do you show you can take care of a child when you're sick, uninsured, working jobs that barely pay the rent?" Emma stood up from the chair, walking toward the window. Her silhouette against the pale light looked almost ethereal, as if she might disappear at any moment. I saw Daniel whenever I could. Supervised visits, once a week if I was lucky. I watched him grow in pieces, Richard. 15 minutes at a time in a cold government office room with a social worker taking notes on every word we said. Richard felt nausea rise up his throat. While he watched Michael grow up in mansions and private schools, his biological son had grown up in the Child Protective Services system. But that's not the worst part, Emma said, turning to face him. 3 months ago, Daniel started getting sick. Extreme fatigue, bruises that wouldn't heal, persistent fever. The doctors ran tests. Richard saw something change on Emma's face. The kind of despair he recognized because he had seen it in mirrors during nightmares. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, she said the words, as if they were a death sentence. It's a type of blood cancer. Aggressive, especially in teenagers. Daniel needs immediate treatment, and his best chance for a cure is a bone marrow transplant. The words hit Richard like bullets. His son he didn't even know, was dying. They tested his bone marrow against donor registries. Emma continued, now speaking quickly as if the words would flee if she didn't capture them. There was no match. They tested my marrow. I'm not compatible. They said the best chance is a close relative, especially a father. Richard felt the world spin around him. 2 sons. He had 2 sons in the same hospital at the same time. Michael, whom he had raised as his own child, recovering from car accident injuries in the VIP wing. And Daniel, his biological son he had never met, dying of cancer in the general ward. Where is he? Richard asked, his voice almost inaudible. Pediatric ward, 3rd floor, Emma answered. Room 312. He doesn't even know you exist, Richard. I never told him about his father, because I didn't want him to know he was rejected even before he was born. Richard stood up, his legs still unstable. 2 sons. One he had raised without knowing he wasn't his, and another who was his blood but was dying alone. I need to see him, he said. But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't that simple. How do you find a son you've lost? How do you talk to a child who is dying, who doesn't know you exist? And, most devastating of all, how do you live with the knowledge that everything could have been different if you had only made one different choice 15 years ago? The elevator descended from the 12th floor to the 3rd with torturous slowness, each floor passing like an eternity. Richard Stone, who had spent his life controlling the pace of the world around him, was now trapped in the relentless speed of a common hospital elevator, his hands tapping impatiently against the metal walls. When the doors finally opened, the contrast hit him like a physical slap. The common ward of Presbyterian Memorial was a completely different world. The hallways, although clean and functional, had linoleum floors instead of marble. The walls were painted a pale green that tried to be comforting but only succeeded in looking institutional. The air carried the pungent smell of disinfectant mixed with something harder to identify: despair, perhaps, fear. The heavy fragrance of many sick people living very close to each other. Richard walked quickly down the corridor, passing rooms with 2, 3, sometimes 4 beds, where entire families crowded into uncomfortable plastic chairs, some people sleeping on the floor on blankets brought from home. There were children playing in the hall with broken toys, mothers whispering prayers in Spanish, fathers with faces wrecked by worry, speaking on cheap cell phones with desperate voices. It was a world Richard Stone had never seen up close, although he was sure it existed somewhere on the periphery of his consciousness. It was the world where people lived when they didn't have $3,000 to spend on suits. Room 312 was at the end of the corridor, and Richard stopped in front of the door, as if it were a physical barrier. His hands trembled as he pushed the door open, and the sound of bare feet on the linoleum behind him made him turn around. Emma had followed him. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice carrying a maternal protectiveness that transcended years of suffering. "He's very weak today." Richard didn't answer. Instead, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Room 312 held 4 beds, separated only by thin curtains that offered an illusion of privacy. The air was heavy with the sound of respirators, the soft beep of heart monitors, and the labored breathing of sick children. Daniel's bed was near the window, a position Richard imagined Emma had specifically requested so the boy could see the sky. And then he saw his son for the first time. Daniel Davis looked even smaller than his 14 years, his fragile body almost lost among the hospital's white sheets. His head was bald from chemotherapy treatments, but Richard could see where the hair had been dark and wavy like his own hair when he was young. The boy's skin was translucent, pale, like fine porcelain, and blue veins were visible through the skin on his thin arms. IV tubes came out of his right hand, connected to a series of bags dripping slowly. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed to demand great effort, but it was when Richard saw Daniel's face that he felt as if the world stopped spinning. It was like looking into a time mirror. The shape of the eyes, even closed, was identical to his. The line of the nose, the curve of the jaw, even the way the lips curved slightly downward at rest, everything was a younger, more innocent version of Richard Stone. "My God," he whispered, collapsing heavily into the plastic chair beside the bed. He really is my son." Dr. Martinez appeared at the door, a serious expression on his brown face. He was the same doctor who had treated Richard when he collapsed, but now his attention was fully focused on his young patient. "Mr. Stone," he said, his voice low and professional, "Emma updated me on the situation. I imagine you have questions." Richard couldn't take his eyes off Daniel. Every breath the boy took seemed precious, fragile, as if it could be the last. "How much time does he have?" he asked, surprised by the firmness of his own voice. "Doctor." Martinez pulled a chart from a clipboard, his eyebrows furrowing as he studied the numbers. "Without a bone marrow transplant, maybe 3 weeks, possibly a month if we're lucky. His leukemia is particularly aggressive. The chemotherapy treatments are helping control the progression but cannot cure him. And with the transplant? With a compatible donor, the chances of full recovery are about 85%. Daniel is young, and his body has responded well to treatment so far. But finding a compatible donor..." Richard stood abruptly, his businessman's mind shifting into problem-solving mode. How much does it cost to move him up the donor list? How much to get access to the best doctors, the best hospitals in the country? Money is no object. Dr. Martinez shook his head slowly. "Mr. Stone, I understand your desperation, but it's not a matter of money. The bone marrow donation system is based on genetic compatibility, not financial status. There's no way to buy a spot at the front of the list, and no way to speed up the process of finding a compatible donor." Frustration exploded inside Richard like hot lava. All his life, money had been the solution to every problem. Hostile companies? Buy them. Legal problems? Hire the best lawyers. Political obstacles? Donate to the right candidates. But he couldn't buy life for his son. "Then test my marrow," he said, already pulling out his phone. "Now, immediately, cancel all my appointments." Dr. Martinez nodded. "I've already prepared the paperwork. As the biological father, you have the highest chance of compatibility. We can do the test today and have results in 48 hours. 48 hours? Can it be faster? Mr. Stone, some processes can't be rushed, no matter how much money you have." It was then that Daniel shifted in the bed. A small groan escaped his lips, and his eyes, the same eyes Richard saw in the mirror every morning, opened slowly. Richard felt his heart stop. For the first time in his life, he was looking into the eyes of his biological son. Daniel studied him for a moment, confusion clouding his delicate features. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, he spoke. Are you the rich man Mommy talked about?" The words landed on Richard like stabs. The rich man. Not daddy, not dad, just the rich man, as if being rich was his only defining identity. Richard tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. "Are you my father?" Daniel asked, his voice growing even weaker. "Mommy said you're very important, that you have important things to do." Emma appeared on the other side of the bed, her hands gently caressing Daniel's face. "Yes, darling," she whispered. "This is your father." Daniel tried to smile, but the effort seemed to exhaust his few remaining energies. Are you going to stay with me?" he asked, his eyes already beginning to close again. "Just for a little while?" Richard felt something break inside his chest. Not just break, but shatter into thousands of fragments, cutting every fiber of his being. Before he could answer, Daniel slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing returning to the labored rhythm from before. Richard Stone, the man who had conquered Chicago, who had built an empire, who had never shown weakness to anyone, collapsed into the plastic chair and began to cry. Tears started falling from his eyes as if a dam had finally burst. Tears for all the years lost, for all the nights he hadn't been there, for all the birthdays not celebrated, for all the hugs not given. Tears for a son who was dying, who barely knew him, who called him only the rich man. "I will stay," he whispered to the sleeping Daniel, his voice breaking. "I promise I will stay. I will be the father I should have been from the very beginning." His trembling hand reached for Daniel's small, fragile hand. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Stone held the hand of his true son. And as the tears kept falling, he made a silent promise, not only to Daniel but to himself. No matter the cost, no matter what he had to sacrifice, he would not lose this son too. Richard's phone rang at 6 in the morning, interrupting the silent vigil he had kept by Daniel's bedside throughout the night. He had fallen asleep in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his hand still holding his son's fragile hand when the sharp sound tore him from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. Dr. Martinez was on the line, and there was something in his voice that made Richard's heart race. "Mr. Stone, I have the compatibility test results. You are a perfect match for Daniel. We can proceed with the transplant immediately." Richard felt such an intense wave of relief that for a moment he couldn't breathe. Finally, there was something he could do, something that his money couldn't buy, but his body could provide. "When?" he asked, already rising from the chair, trying not to wake Daniel. "When can we do this?" "Preoperative preparation will begin today. The procedure would be tomorrow morning if you agree." "I agree. Make all necessary preparations." Richard ended the call and looked at Daniel, who was still sleeping peacefully, his breathing a little less labored than the night before. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Stone felt he was doing something truly important. That's when he heard heels echoing down the corridor. Expensive heels. He knew them well, because he had bought the shoes that made this specific sound against the linoleum. Jimmy Choo, limited edition, $1,200. Victoria. She appeared at the entrance of room 312 like an elegant storm. Even at 6:30 in the morning, Victoria Hartwell Stone was impeccable. Her white Chanel suit was perfectly tailored, her blonde hair pinned in a bun that had cost $300 to achieve, and her emerald green eyes shone with a cold fury that Richard knew all too well. Behind her came two other men with expensive suits and serious looks. Lawyers. Richard recognized one of them, Harrison Blackwood, from Blackwood and Associates, who charged $1,000 an hour and didn't take cases worth less than $10 million. "Richard," Victoria's voice cut through the air of the room like a scalpel. "We need to talk, now." Emma, who had fallen asleep in a chair in the corner of the room, woke at the sound. Her eyes widened when she saw Victoria, but she stayed silent, her maternal instincts making her edge closer to Daniel's bed. "Victoria, how did you?" Richard began, but she interrupted him with an imperious gesture. "How did I find out?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "Richard, did you really think you could have a public emotional crisis in the VIP wing of Presbyterian Memorial without me being notified? Dr. Harrison called me last night. Apparently, you had some kind of episode that drew a lot of attention." She gestured to the lawyers, who began opening their leather briefcases. "But that's not important," Victoria continued, her eyes calculatingly moving from Richard to Daniel, then to Emma. "What is important is that you stop this ridiculous performance immediately." "Performance?" Richard felt fury rise in his chest. "My son is dying!" "Your son is perfectly fine in the VIP wing," Victoria retorted coldly. "Michael has fully recovered from the accident. He's asking for you." "No, Victoria. This is my son," Richard said, his hand moving protectively over Daniel's blank. "Daniel is my biological son." Victoria laughed a sound. Richard once found musical, but now sounded like shattering glass. "Oh, Richard. Sweet, naive Richard. Did you really think I didn't know?" The silence that followed was tense enough to cut. "What did you say?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously low. Victoria walked to stand right beside Daniel's bed, studying the sleeping boy with the same expression she would use to examine a defective product. I've known about Emma Davis for 14 years, Richard. I've known about this boy since he was born. I know about every change of address, every lost job, every visit to social services. Emma made a sound that was half groan, half sob. You've been watching us? Private investigators are very useful, Victoria replied, not even looking at Emma, especially when you need to ensure that potential problems stay controlled. Richard stood up from the chair, his hands clenching into fists. Controlled? You knew my son was living in poverty and didn't tell me. Your son was living exactly where he should be, Victoria retorted. Away from us. Away from our legitimate family. Away from our social status. Blackwood, the lawyer, stepped forward, consulting a document in his hands. Mr. Stone, my client is prepared to initiate divorce proceedings immediately if you proceed with this transplant. The prenuptial agreement you signed is very clear about conduct that brings discredit to the Hartwell family. Conduct that brings discredit? Richard laughed bitterly. Saving my son's life brings discredit? Publicly acknowledging an illegitimate child from a previous relationship, especially one that will attract media attention, definitely constitutes a breach of the agreement terms. Blackwood continued coldly. My client would be entitled to a substantial settlement that would leave you with approximately 15% of your current assets. Richard felt as if the ground was moving beneath his feet. Victoria was not only threatening to bankrupt him, she was threatening to financially destroy any chance he had of helping Daniel in the future. But then, Victoria dealt the blow she knew would be fatal. And of course, she said, her voice taking on an almost casual tone, Michael will need to be transferred to another hospital. I've already made arrangements with the Chicago Medical Center. Michael will be transferred this afternoon, and you will not have visitation rights until you make a sensible decision about your priorities. Richard's blood froze in his veins. You can't do that. Michael is my son, too. Michael is my son, Victoria replied. Legally, socially, and in every way that matters. You may have raised him, but I can take him from you just as you once took this boy from his mother. The casual cruelty of the remark hit Richard like a physical blow. Emma made a sound of pain, her hands instinctively moving to cover her face. Victoria turned to Emma, and when she spoke, her voice was loaded with absolute disdain. You must be very proud of yourself. 15 years trying to destroy my family, and you finally managed to drag Richard into this pathetic drama. I never, Emma began, but Victoria cut her off. You never what? Never planned this? Never hoped a medical tragedy could be your entry back into Richard's life? Stop, Richard said, his voice low but authoritative. Stop right now. Victoria turned to him, and for a moment her mask of calculated coldness slipped, revealing something that might have been genuine hurt. Are you really going to choose them over us? She asked, and for the first time since she arrived, her voice had a human quality. After all we've built together? After all the love we gave Michael? Richard looked at her, then at Daniel, lying fragile in the hospital bed, then at Emma, who was crying silently in the corner. 2 families, 2 lives, 2 mutually exclusive choices. Emma stood up from the chair, wiping tears from her face with the backs of her hands. Richard, she said softly, you don't have to. I understand if you choose Michael. He is the son you raised, who knows you as a father. Daniel and I, we survived 14 years without you. We can. But her voice broke, and she couldn't finish the sentence. Because they both knew Daniel wouldn't survive another 14 days without the transplant. Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of wrong choices, missed opportunities, denied love, and given love. When he opened them again, he knew that the decision he made in the next seconds would define not just the rest of his life, but the lives of 2 children who, each in their own way, were his sons. The most important choice of his life lay before him, and there was no way to make it without destroying something precious in the process. The silence in room 312 dragged on like an eternity measured in heartbeats. Richard could hear the distant hum of the machines, the whisper of the air conditioning, and the almost inaudible sound of Daniel's labored breathing. Victoria and her lawyers waited, their eyes fixed on him like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Emma remained in the corner, her hands clasped in a silent prayer. Then, slowly, Richard rose from the plastic chair. When he spoke, his voice had a clarity it hadn't possessed in 15 years. "Victoria," he said, turning to face her, "you're right about one thing. This is a choice that defines who I really am." She smiled smugly, assuming victory. "I knew you'd be sensible, Richard. Michael needs you and our family." "No," he interrupted, and the word cut through the air like a blade. "You don't understand. I choose Daniel." Victoria's smile died instantly. "Richard, you can't be serious." "Blackwood," Richard addressed the lawyer, completely ignoring Victoria. "I want you to prepare papers to transfer all my personal assets into a medical fund. Every share, every property, every bank account, everything." Blackwood exchanged a nervous look with Victoria. "Mr. Stone, I represent Mrs. Hartwell. I cannot." "Then I will hire my own attorney," Richard said, already taking out his cell phone. "Patterson and Associates. Tell Jonathan Patterson that Richard Stone needs him at Presbyterian Memorial Hospital in 1 hour. And tell him to draw up papers that will transfer approximately $400 million. Victoria went pale. "Richard, you've completely lost your mind? Are you willing to destroy everything we built together for a child you barely know?" Richard walked to stand right in front of her, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 15 years of remorse. "Victoria, I built a fortune, but I lost my soul in the process. I abandoned my son when he needed me most. I raised another son based on a lie. And now, for the first time in 15 years, I have the chance to do something that has nothing to do with money or power or social status." He turned to look at Daniel, who was still asleep, oblivious to the storm unfolding around him. "This boy is dying, and I'm the only person on earth who can save him. Do you really think I'm going to let him die to protect a bank account?" "Michael is your son too," Victoria shouted, finally losing her composure. "You're going to ruin his life for a stranger?" "Michael is not a stranger to me," Richard replied calmly. "I love him as if he were my own blood. And that's exactly why the medical fund will include provisions for him as well. He will never go without, never be without medical care, never worry about money." Emma stepped forward hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard, you don't have to do this. You don't have to lose everything." "Emma," he turned to her, and for the first time she saw in his eyes the man she had loved so many years ago. "I've already lost everything that truly matters once. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice." Victoria made one last desperate attempt. "What if I promise not to interfere with the transplant? Can we find a solution that protects our family without this dramatic financial destruction?" Richard studied her face, the face he had known for 15 years, that he had kissed at the altar, that he had slept beside thousands of nights, and he saw, clearly, that she would never understand. "Victoria, there is no our family. There never was. There was only a convenient business partnership disguised as a marriage." The words hit her like bullets, and she recoiled as if physically wounded. "Guards," she whispered to Blackwood. "Call security. My husband is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. He is not competent to make financial decisions." But Richard was already moving toward the door, his mind working with a clarity he hadn't had in years. "Dr. Martinez," he called down the hall, "I'm ready for the transplant. Let's make this happen today." The next hours passed in a blur of medical preparations. Richard signed consent papers, legal documents, and paperwork transferring his fortune. Jonathan Patterson arrived with a team of lawyers, working feverishly to establish the medical fund that would protect not just Daniel and Michael, but dozens of other children who needed medical care but couldn't afford it. Victoria made a last, desperate move, showing up in the VIP wing with private security to remove Michael from the hospital. But Dr. Hamilton, Michael's pediatric cardiologist, physically blocked the entrance to the room. "Mrs. Stone," he said firmly, "your son is still recovering from significant trauma. Moving him now would be medically irresponsible. He stays here until I determine it is safe for him to be discharged." It was then that Emma appeared, She was more fragile than ever, her steps unsteady as she walked down the VIP wing corridor. But there was a determination in her eyes that transcended her deteriorating physical condition. "Victoria," she said softly, "can I talk to you? And to Michael?" Victoria turned on her with fury, but something in Emma's expression, a kindness that persisted despite years of suffering, made her hesitate. Michael was awake, sitting on the luxurious hospital bed, his green eyes confused and scared. He had heard arguments, shouting, arrivals and departures of strange people, but no one had explained what was happening. Emma approached the bed, moving carefully as if every step caused pain. "Hi, Michael," she said gently. "My name is Emma. Are you the lady who made my dad angry?" Michael asked, and there was an innocence in his voice that made Emma's heart ache. "No, dear. I'm the mother of another boy who is very sick, and your dad is trying to help him get better." Michael studied her face, and Emma could see traces of Richard in the thoughtful expression of the boy. "Will the boy be okay?" Michael asked. Emma felt tears burning in her eyes. "I hope so, dear. Your dad is a very brave man for trying to help him." And then, with a simplicity only children possess, Michael said, "So it's okay. If my dad can help someone not die, then he should do it." Victoria looked at her son she had raised to value status and privilege above all else, speaking about sacrifice and compassion as if they were the most natural things in the world. Meanwhile, in the operating room, Richard was being prepared for the transplant. The lights were too bright, the air conditioning made him cold, and the sounds of medical equipment created a strange symphony that tangled his memories. "Mr. Stone, doctor." Martinez appeared beside the operating table. "The procedure will take approximately 4 hours. It's a relatively simple process. We will extract bone marrow from your hip and immediately transfer it to Daniel. You will feel some pain afterward, but there are no significant risks." "And Daniel?" Richard asked. "What are the real chances of success?" "Doctor?" Martinez hesitated for just a moment. "With a perfect match like yours, and given the timing, the chances of complete success are approximately 90%. But Richard, even if everything goes perfectly, Daniel will still have a long road of recovery ahead." "But he will live? If everything goes as planned, yes, he will live." Richard closed his eyes, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. "Then let's do it." The anesthesia pulled him down like a gentle wave, and the last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Daniel's face in his mind, not as he was now, pale and sick, but as Richard imagined he would be when healed. Strong, healthy, alive. The procedure took exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Dr. Martinez worked with the precision of an artisan, extracting Richard's bone marrow and immediately preparing it for transfusion into Daniel. In a nearby room, Daniel was prepared to receive the transplant that would save his life. And then, at 3:47 p.m., on a Tuesday in October, Richard Stone's bone marrow was transfused into his son Daniel Davis. It was the most expensive gift Richard had ever given, and also the most priceless. When Richard began waking from anesthesia 3 hours later, the first thing he heard was Dr. Martinez's voice. "The transplant was successful, Mr. Stone. Daniel is responding well." "Very well, actually." Richard tried to speak, but his throat was dry from the anesthesia. Dr. Martinez appeared in his field of vision, smiling. "How?" Richard finally managed to whisper. "How is he?" "Getting stronger every hour. It will take weeks for a full recovery, but all signs are positive. You saved your son's life, Richard." Richard closed his eyes, feeling a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with surgery and everything to do with 15 years of weight finally being lifted from his shoulders. "Can I see him?" he asked. "In a few hours, when you're strong enough to walk. But Richard, there's something you should know." Richard opened his eyes, something in Dr. Martinez's tone making his heart race. "What?" "Emma, she collapsed in the hallway while you were in surgery. We admitted her, but..." Dr. Martinez paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's very sick, Richard. Much sicker than anyone realized." The May sun filtered softly through the green leaves of Central Park, creating a mosaic of light and shadow over the blue picnic blanket that Richard had carefully spread out on the grass. It was a simple blanket, bought at Target for $29, a stark contrast to the $2,000 Egyptian linen sheets that had once covered his bed in the Gold Coast mansion. But Richard Stone had never felt richer. "Daniel, watch out for that frisbee," Emma shouted, laughing as she watched her 15-year-old son run across the grass with an energy that had seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. Daniel had grown 4 inches since the transplant. His dark, wavy hair had grown back, and his cheeks had regained the rosy color only healthy children possess. "Sorry, Mom," Daniel shouted back, but his smile was so wide it was impossible to take the apology seriously. Richard watched from his seated position on the blanket, a sense of wonder still washing over him whenever he saw Daniel run, jump, simply be alive. Doctor. Martinez had said Daniel's recovery was among the most successful he had ever witnessed. Not only had the cancer completely disappeared, but the boy seemed to be making up for all the lost years of physical activity, as if his body were celebrating every day of health. "Dad, Richard, are you really going to let him win like that?" Michael asked, appearing next to Richard with an expression of mock indignation. The 12-year-old boy had started calling Richard Dad Richard to distinguish him from Daniel, a solution that had naturally arisen and warmed Richard's heart in a way he had never anticipated. "Michael, you know I don't play to lose," Richard replied, standing and stretching muscles that still stiffened after long periods of sitting. "Let's show your brother how to really play frisbee." The word brother still sounded strange, but less and less so. Michael had taken time to process the truth about Daniel, about the complex situation that had resulted in having 2 different dads but sharing the same dad at heart. But children, Richard had discovered, had a capacity to accept complexities that adults found impossible. Emma approached, carrying a picnic basket she had carefully prepared that morning. She was unrecognizable compared to the deteriorated woman who had burst into the hospital 6 months earlier. The tuberculosis treatment she had received paid for by the medical fund Richard had established had not only saved her life but restored a vitality she thought she had lost forever. "Is anyone hungry?" she asked, starting to unpack turkey sandwiches, sliced apples, and cold water in reusable bottles. "Always," Daniel and Michael answered in unison, making Richard and Emma laugh. It was surprising how the boys had connected. Despite the age difference and the completely different circumstances of their upbringing, they had found common ground that transcended blood or social status. Michael had introduced Daniel to the world of video games and organized sports, while Daniel had taught Michael about art, history, and, in a way only children can, about resilience in the face of adversity. "Richard," Emma said softly as the boys attacked the sandwiches, "how are things going with the new apartment?" Richard smiled, thinking of the small 2-bedroom apartment he had rented in Lincoln Park. It had 800 square feet, a tiny kitchen, and a view of another building's parking lot. It was also the happiest place he had lived in 15 years. "It's perfect. Daniel will have his own room when he comes to stay on weekends, and Michael has a place to escape from Victoria when she gets to Victoria." Emma laughed, but there was sympathy in her eyes. Victoria had become an increasingly isolated figure in recent months. The story of the transplant had leaked to the social press, a romanticized version portraying Richard as a heroic father who had sacrificed his fortune to save his son. Victoria, who had tried to block the transplant, did not come off well in the public narrative. "She'll recover," Emma said gently. "People like Victoria always recover. It's a skill they have, maybe," Richard replied. "But Michael is better off away from that toxicity for now." He looked at the 2 boys, who were now trying to teach each other increasingly elaborate frisbee tricks, their laughter echoing through the park. It was a sound Richard had never realized he had been missing until he heard it again. "Emma," he said hesitantly, "there's something I want to give you." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the golden locket. Emma had tried to return it to him at the hospital, but Richard had insisted she keep it. Now, however, there was something different about it. "You changed the photo," she said, her eyes widening when he opened the locket. The original photograph, Richard and Emma, young and in love, she pregnant with Daniel, was still on the left side. But now, on the right, was a new photo, all 4 of them together. Richard and Emma sitting on the grass, Daniel and Michael kneeling behind them, all smiling at the camera. It was a photo taken the previous week. "On the first really warm day of spring," I thought, Richard began, then stopped, searching for the right words. I thought maybe it was time to update what forever means. Emma held the locket, her fingers delicately tracing the new engraving on the inside of the lid. Family always finds a way. May 2024. Richard, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. It's perfect. They were not a romantic couple. Perhaps they would never be again. Much had happened. Many wounds had healed differently than they were originally. But they were a family, in a way Richard had never imagined possible. Dad! Daniel shouted from where he was playing. Can you come here for a second? Richard turned, and his heart almost stopped. Daniel had said, Dad. Not the rich man. Not Richard. Dad. It was the first time. Richard stood, his legs suddenly shaky, and walked toward the boys. Daniel was holding the frisbee, but there was something in his expression that was more serious than the game. What is it, son? Richard asked, the word son coming naturally from his lips. I just wanted to... Daniel hesitated, then looked directly into Richard's eyes. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For saving me. For being here now. For being my dad. Even when you didn't know I existed. Richard felt tears burning in his eyes. He knelt down to be at Daniel's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. Daniel, I should be the one apologizing for all the years I lost. You don't have to thank me for finally doing what I should have done from the start. But you did, Daniel said simply. When it mattered most, you did. Michael approached, standing beside Daniel. And you didn't lose everything, Dad Richard, he said. With the strange wisdom children sometimes possess, you actually gained a bigger family. Richard looked at the two boys, one he had raised based on a well-intentioned lie, the other he had abandoned and almost lost forever, and realized Michael was right. Emma joined them, and without any words or fanfare, the four of them embraced in a hug that seemed to encapsulate everything forgiveness, redemption, love, and the promise of a future none of them could have anticipated. I love you all, Richard murmured, his voice broken with emotion. All of you. More than anything I've ever owned. More than anything I've ever built. We love you too, Dad. Daniel replied, and this time, the words sounded like the most natural thing in the world. As the sun began to set over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Richard Stone finally understood what true wealth looked like. It was not measured in dollars or properties or power over others. It was measured in moments like this, in children who choose to forgive you, in second chances you never expected to receive, in love that survives even the worst mistakes. And as they walked together through the park toward the subway, Richard thought about the locket in his pocket and smiled. He had started with a promise of forever that he had spectacularly broken. But maybe, just maybe, he had found a new kind of forever. One built not on prompts or contracts or social expectations, but on choosing to show up, day after day, for the people who mattered most. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Stone felt that he was truly home.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.